It's difficult to say anything after these kinds of words of the bishop. I kindly ask you, Bishop, to bless this gathering. Dear friends, I'm Dragan Davidović. I'm the director of the Republic Secretariat for Religious Affairs, the government of the area. So this is a secretariat responsible for relations between churches and religious societies, communities, and the government. This secretariat actually is a continuation from the Ministry of Religions that we had before 1995, and its role is not lesser. Unfortunately, the federation part of Bosnia and Herzegovina does not have such an institution. And I was kindly invited by Mr. Dusan Pavlović to try to explain the situation here and the legal position of churches and religious communities in the Republic of Srpska, Bosnia and Herzegovina. I accepted, and I'd like to bring you down to the realities of the situation. I carefully listened to your presentations quite attentively, and I was quite happy to hear your presentations. But the discussion was mainly around religion, but looked in a vacuum, so to say, without understanding how, in legal terms, churches and religious communities, so in legal terms and in reality, live. So in a true society, what problems they encounter. Now I'd like to walk you through a number of elements of the law on churches and religious communities, the flaws and deficiencies. Not deficiencies or flaws, but inability to implement certain elements of the law. And a new phenomenon, I'd say, quite novel, and that is the issue of fundamental treaties or agreements between religious communities on the one hand and Bosnia and Herzegovina and as a state union on the other hand. Two have been signed between the Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church. The Jews were not quite interested, and they're still not interested in having such an agreement. And we have an unresolved issue when it comes to the agreement with the Islamic community for 20 years or so. It has been unresolved, but I'll get back to it. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, we introduced a law on the legal position of churches and religious communities in early 2004. Lawyers, theologians, the Interreligious Council, which was mentioned here, all worked on the law. Professor Bežinović, I think, mentioned it in his presentation. So I said lawyers, jurists, NGOs, international community, as we call it here in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And we worked on it for 2 or 3 years, and a product of the discussion and reconciliation of positions was a law in early 2004, as I said, and it is a lex specialis. It applies to the entire territory of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and it was agreed by the entities here and everyone on board, churches, religious communities, simply because the organization of churches and religious communities does not know entity boundary lines or international borders. So, and it was quite logical that we should have one single law which should actually govern the relationships and relations between churches or religious communities with the state to ensure, first of all, the freedom to exercise their faith, to protect religious communities, and also to regulate obligations and rights. What is very important about this law is that it stipulates well, first of all, it has only 21 articles. There are some very important determining factors here. First of all, we introduce the right to religious expression, and we define religious community or church. We prohibit churches and religious communities to preach and spread hatred towards others. There is a freedom to rights, to ceremonies, publishing, access to the media. The legal status is also defined. There is a continuity of personality. Our historically established churches and religious communities, specifically the Islamic community, the Serbian Orthodox Church, the Catholic Church, and the Jewish community. I need to note here that under the umbrella of the Catholic Church, we imply the Roman Catholic Church, so the Latin tradition, and the Greco-Catholic Church. The people call it the Uniate Church, so the Greek, right, and the Jewish community, so 4. And other communities that may prove that are able to prove their historic tradition. As for other religious communities that keep emerging, that were not registered at the time on any grounds, we introduced the rule books. The Ministry of Civil Affairs introduced the so-called rule books, and especially the rule book or a set of rules for the registration. So one community needs 300 signatures of its members. It needs to have a statute and a program manifesto. So if they want to be registered in Bosnia-Herzegovina, they need to provide reassurances that they will not be destructive. Everything else is a matter of course. Many sociologists believe that 300 signatures is quite high. So like 30 people should be enough. From practice, I think that 300 is an optimum number, really, for a community to be registered. Registration is not necessary for historical churches, I mean those listed, except that there are lower organizational units, that is parochies, etc., jamaats, whatever, and Jewish municipalities should be registered to get the so-called identification number. And because this number serves them to enter the market, so to say, because, with this identification number, they can make payments, fulfill their obligations apart from, the church rituals. This law has a number of flaws. The key deficiency is that there is no sanction for action or inaction or omission to act. So there is a prohibition in the law, but there is no sanction, for the prohibition. This is a major problem, which, although we try to smartly avoid it, it turns out to be a big thing in the realities. Because at one point of time we saw para-jamats emerging. We could not sanction para-jamats for not being registered. So you could do nothing on the registration side. And there are some other problems that could arise from the fact that there is no sanction, because then you need to refer to other laws, for example, the criminal code or the infractions code, etc., to allow society to intervene. That's the first problem. And the second problem is now In the political arena, the thing is that the law expressly orders society to enact a restitution law. That's one of the major things in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and it has to happen. It'll have to happen, to the best of my knowledge. If we really want to join the EU, it's not possible without a restitution law. It's not possible without the application of that law. Irrespective of that, it would be a law that would also stipulate damages and compensation, but it's also a moral law that would actually provide remedy to those who were during the agrarian reform stripped of their property. And now this has turned into a political problem. And we have not been able to agree as to what year will be the starting point. So, as of what year are we going to calculate the restitution period? Would it be 1918? So, the agrarian reform in the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats and Slovenians. So, the end of feudalism. Or would it be the 1945 when the communist government started nationalizing and confiscating property? So this issue is quite problematic, and it's still outside of the terrain of final discussion. But in this sense, we say here, and we said here that in the reality is there are also other things, other elements, except the wish of religious leaders to embark on the path to agreement. So there are things that obstruct this mutual, how shall I put it, tolerance. And this is a matter of the state, right? And its relations with religious communities. This relationship could be tolerant vis-à-vis a church or religious community, but at the same time it can discriminate others. For example, this is related very much to the issue of the agreement between the Bosnia and Herzegovina as a state and the Islamic community. So the notion of tolerance towards one group can be actually a discrimination of other denominations. So it's a bit tricky. So one of the major problems here is the law on restitution, which hinders the implementation of this law, and sanctions for action or omission to act. For example, the Serbian Orthodox Church had a major problem with a phenomenon. In the Serbian Orthodox Church, there was a schism, a heresy actually, and Raško-Prizren eparchy in exile was created with Artemije as its leader, which through decision, congregational decision, was removed and then excommunicated even. He had his followers, and two are here now in a cottage near Banja Luka, and they actually turned it into a monastery, and they had 60 to 80 followers. So what happened? Judging by all elements, they were monks, they had Orthodox liturgies, they had their followers, but the law, this one I'm currently discussing, and the agreement between the Serbian Orthodox Church and Bosnia and Herzegovina did not allow and does not allow to usurp the prerogatives of the Serbian Orthodox Church, including all other attributes, the coats of arms, or, insignia. No one can actually set up a monastery without the Archbishop's approval. And they were the actual followers, the villagers who lived there, who actually turned to the Serbian Orthodox Church wanting to eliminate, those groups. And we could not do anything. They were not registered. That cottage was not a church as a building. So there were certain jeopardies for the followers being there. But there was no provision in the criminal code or anywhere to eliminate this group from being a church that's not a church. The only way, because they were tried by the court and they were removed from the ranks. And Bosnia-Herzegovina recognizes both the Catholic Church and the Serbian Orthodox Church based on the agreements. And it recognizes the constitution of the Serbian Orthodox Church and everything that it stipulates. For the Catholic Church, the provisions of the Second Vatican Assembly are recognized. And in the first step, now we are in the first step, of negotiating the agreement with the Islamic community, and we'll recognize whatever they have. So we had to use the fact that there was an infraction, like misdemeanor. So the other law was breached. They portrayed themselves falsely because they were removed from the Serbian Orthodox Church. So they were punished for a false presentation, and that was the only way for us to sanction them, for the government to sanction them, and thus help the Serbian Orthodox Church. And when it comes to Jamaats, the Islamic community managed to calm down the situation there.
Well, now, that is where this sanctions problem stems from within this law. So, in the application of the law, I think that what I've been doing all these years, coordinating relations between the Islamic community and the executive organs, the Ministry of Education and so on, and with bishops and so on, especially here in Banja Luka, and with bishops and archbishops of Serbian Orthodox Church. They do not have that kind of hierarchy action, so they accept the Sarajevo municipality as the first amongst the equal, because they are in the center, and there are diplomats with a lot of influence, and they accepted Mr. Finci as their prominent member. So we do have rather fair relations. They do invest a lot of their memory monuments, and in Banja Luka we also built Jewish Memorial Center with a synagogue in Doboj as well. A lot is being done to commemorate their heritage and cemeteries. So basically, internal relations amongst confessions here is rather fair. Problems pop up once they start discussing historical projections for certain events and facts dating back 800 years or 1,000 years, and when it is used and weaponized for today's purposes. So, some people do not respect the fact that time and space are coordinates, that certain facts and which cannot easily translate into today's norms. From time to time there is a spark, but the situation is shall I say, tolerable. What we do not discuss is the influence of atheists onto problems of different confessions. Don't forget that belligerent communism brought belligerent atheism. It had devastating consequences on some things, but religion was almost like in vacuum, and it remained intact in a parallel world, and atheism also exists. And when it comes to the status of churches, it is also decided by atheists as well, but with no fervor that they used to have. And what their position is when it comes to tolerance is a different issue. How they view these relations. This issue is interesting, and lack of contract between Islamic community and Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is still out there in the open, even though Islamic community is functioning normally. It is not something that hampers them. It is not a conditio sine qua non whether they will function or not. So it is not a decisive factor, but it is important in order to define the position of the state and the Islamic community. All the attempts have not been successful, and the starting point of the Islamic community is that basic contracts with Catholic Church and Serbian Orthodox Church should be the same, and all other discussion about specific aspects of Islam are something else. And then we come to these problems. How specific aspects of Islam can be guaranteed by the state of Bosnia and Herzegovina and its entities? If, as Islam community claims, that we and they should guarantee liberty to every believer, and that it will guarantee circumcision as a religious act, also what they require from every believer to go for a Hajj once in lifetime, and other aspects of religious life, their archive to be verified. No one asked anything else. But I, from time to time, take a look and take a peek in how it was done. It's treated as private archive, and they want state to verify it, which is not the case with Serbian Orthodox Church or Catholic Church. And the last opportunity was maybe 6 or 10 months ago, when it was said that the political proposition from the Republic of Srpska to adopt norms of basic contract with Serbian Orthodox Church from 2008 and with Vatican from 2006, because they are rather equal, that such contract should be signed with the Islamic community, and then to see what can be improved. And then maybe all 3 contracts can be upgraded. It was rejected, So we are still discussing the specific aspects of Islam. Now, what are these specific aspects? The proposal from the Republic of Srpska is that all specific aspects should be placed in the context of the labor law, because you can't assume that the state will compel an employer to behave in a certain way and to accept certain aspects, and that apart from annual vacation they will give extra days for somebody to go to Hajj or 2 hours on Friday, or circumcision. So there is a need to make it possible for the state of Bosnia and Herzegovina to defend Islamic community for circumcision in confrontation with Convention on Children's Rights, because there is a fear that circumcision will be deemed a violation of children's rights. Another big problem is that the Islamic community wants to be the only one with the right to interpret Islam in Bosnia and Herzegovina. On the one hand, it would be good because it would accept the fight against fake religion. On the other side, the appearance of 300 faithful people, which on the basis of Islamic dogma and order and rights could set up a community, would pose a very tough question whether to register it or not. So if you register it, it can be seen as a heretic issue or paradžamats. And that, from the point of view of democratic principles and the rights on the free expression of religion, you cannot give monopoly to just to Islamic community. On the other hand, objectively, it would be convenient for the state and the religious community that such a strong Islamic community should be a guarantor that everything would be okay, especially after the war, when there were certain turbulences with so-called paradžamats. So this is the problem that we are discussing now. If we tolerate this, if the state confirms the requirements of the Islamic community, then it would lead to bringing the faithful from other confessions into a discriminatory position. And one could say, not from my personal point of view because I am a believer, they would be placed on the back burner because churches and their communities, according to these contracts, would actually have the right to say which days are off, such as Christmas, Easter, and other religious holidays, such as Bayram, which would be decided by the Islamic community. So these are state holidays. Atheists only have New Year's Eve. But this is the only thing that was imposed onto employers, because it wouldn't matter whether it is executive body or a private organization.
So, we are of the opinion that we need to have a law that would also apply to employers. And the best would be not to exercise any coercion, not to discriminate, one religious community in order to be tolerant to others. We have very good relations with everyone, with all churches and religious communities. In Banja Luka, 4 years ago, we opened a madrasa, a secondary high school. I think there are 8 or 9 in the federation. We have a Catholic school center. So at the level of what we can agree upon, the executive branch of the government, the churches and religious communities do agree. As for the problems, this is my experience. As for problems that we know in advance we cannot resolve, we do not touch. That's a motto. That's actually the practice, as I've seen in my experience. And I hope that this will be the modus operandi in the future. So I'll stop here. Apologies. I may have taken too much of your time. But the most important thing to note is that the government, law, delivery on the commitments and the realities do respect theology, philosophy, and we can think through everything. But you cannot actually persuade a follower to think about the truth. The follower follows, and he does not want to check or verify whether this is glass or not. The moment he starts believing this is glass, and wine is in the glass, and a follower will never ever be in a situation to have a suspicion and opt for scientific means to prove whether this is glass or wine. The problem is institutionalization of false beliefs, history, and other political and governmental circumstances that affect churches and religious communities. And to finish with this sentence, the Monsignor has said that he talks better than he writes. So what I've just been talking about, Athanasie, our Archbishop of Herzegovina, when we discussed the issue of textbooks, he said no. Religion does not need textbooks. Jesus talked, he did not write. Let the teachers talk. And then he had to withdraw his stance because our educational system requires a textbook, requires grading. Now we have an inspector, a theologist, who has a PhD from the Thessaloniki School of Theology, and he's responsible for religious studies, and he knows the conflict between the philosophical, theological, and the actual systems with actual clerks and bureaucracy. So I hope I've clarified things for you. But if there are any questions for me, please shoot. I'm here to answer them. Sorry, we cannot hear the moderator because the microphones. No, if you, I need to go actually. So if you have any questions, please to ask them now. I kindly ask the organizer to let me answer the questions now. Yes, we have one. Thank you. Mr. Davidović, Dragan, for your presentation. It's been very good, clarified lots of things. Now, if you have any questions, because the gentleman needs to go. So we had the gentleman in the back. Yeah, Slavoljub Lukic. I'm the inspector for religious studies in the RS. But if the director allows, I'd like to add something concerning his presentation on the position of religious communities. It's important to know that the religious studies or classes is best regulated and best works generally in the former Yugoslavia and in the southeastern part of Balkan, exactly thanks to laws that regulate religious classes in the Republic of Srpska. I'll give you an example. We have a coordinator for Islamic studies, and he said, based on the system in the Republic of Srpska, any child in any, even the remotest village, can attend religious classes. So this could serve as the best example in the region for others. So this is just an example of how we can work together if we are actually true. So when they shared with us their textbooks to the ministry to have a look at them and the Pedagogical Institute, I realized, because the religious classes are from year 2 to year 9. So I said they were not in Cyrillic. And because Latin is taught since the second half of year 3. So I said, could you please rewrite your books for year 2 in Cyrillic so that it is available to the pupils who live here? So they said yes immediately. So they printed their textbooks in Cyrillic. So if we want to live together and if we are truthful with each other, we'll have the results. Thank you. Thank you for your question and clarification. If you'll please introduce yourself. Yes, hello, I'm Davor Stupar. I'm a lawyer. I come from the Ministry of the Interior. I have a question for Mr. Davidović. I carefully, attentively listened to his presentation, especially about the legislation. What about sects? What about sects that are destructive, that pay no attention to any law whatsoever? So how do you go about them? Do you have any penal provisions? Or, I mean, because now we have floods of Satanist and other churches that are quite destructive. I mean, they take property, they take lives, they take whatever they can grab. Thank you. Well, I've just said that the law itself does not have sanctions or punishment of those who fail to register. So, as a matter of the Secretariat, that has a coordinating role, we coordinate the efforts of the police as well, we have no way to sanction them. Now, this is a matter of, well, how shall I put it? Simply they're not registered. In this dispute with Artemije and his followers, we recommended, and it was demanded, that specialists for electrical installations, fire, the police, special forces, and others, go and have a look at the cottage where 50 people gathered together and produce a report as to the threats of having candles lit, in a cottage with 50 people on. So we tried to find ways without touching the religious freedoms, so whoever can talk to the sun or the tree. But the thing is that we try to do something by using other grounds. For example, gathering in a space that's not appropriate. As for the registration, well, our hands are tied. Nothing is there that we can do, unless there are sects that pretend to portray themselves as Islamic community, as para Jamats, or the Catholic Church. There is a problem, but it's not us that we react. There are certain, not in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but in Herzegovina, for example, the Catholic Church has a problem with certain friars, and you'll see, they claim they are Franciscans, but they are not now officially part of the church. I mean, they are not blessed or allowed to speak by the relevant bishop, right? So they speak on their own. But we do not have any competence there, but we could have maybe a proposal as to what could be done, which law could be invoked to eliminate that problem of sects and destructive actions. That's why the registration instruction stipulates that in addition to the number of signatures, there needs to be a statute and a manifesto, sort of manifesto that cannot be destructive. They need to have a building or a house or whatever. I think that we should do more, actually, to peruse, a set of laws to see what can be done. It's quite difficult, actually, to proclaim anyone as destructive. It's not easy. You need actually find specialists to understand their dogmas and ways of public speech, so to say, to understand that they are destructive. Thank you. Mr. Hočevar, Monsignor Hočevar has a question. Thank you. The government, what are the criteria for material support to churches and religious communities? So what are the criteria when they register, for example? Does the government know who the responsible person is, responsible for the community? And can the government actually launch a dialogue with this initial priest, for example? Or, for example, those friars that are disobedient, who do not obey their bishops, or who supports them? Do you support them, or do you give them some money, for example, from the budget, just as others? Maybe this is an opportunity to showcase a good synergy, to ensure positive development. Thank you very much for your question. This issue with friars from Bosnia and Herzegovina is not within our jurisdiction. That's the federation, the other entity. And there is a solution if someone asked us, just as this one. So someone who's eliminated from the rank does not have the right to use the attributes of the Catholic Church or the order, right? That's the abuse that could be declared false presentation, because by the provisions of the order, those persons are excommunicated. But that's up to the bishop and, the diocese to initiate proceedings before the court in Mostar Čapljina, for against those persons for false presentation. And the court, on the basis of the general of the order, who cite the excommunication, so the court should be actually endorse it as a value statement, as a fact on the basis of which they could be punished for false presentation. And in court, we managed to do this in Kotor Varoš. So the court, although the lawyers and judges were convinced that this is in the realm of the religious freedom, they nevertheless concluded that taking the attributes of another church or religious community amounts to false presentation. As for the financial support, yes. There are certain monies. The Secretariat has a budget. The money is relatively small. And generally, whenever the money is small, then we direct the money to the protection of cultural heritage. And that's the restoration of all manuscripts, icons, and other details that constitute the cultural heritage of churches and religious communities. So this is just a thin envelope, and we try to do our best here. For example, we helped the issuance, the printing of Quran from 18-something, a great translation. So it was in the Cyrillic and also Mr. Karic's interpretation of Quran. It's a quite a representative edition. So we did that 7 or 8 years ago. So in that sense, so the small amount of money we have, we use it in this way, but collectively, aggregately, huge amounts of money were invested into the rehabilitation of the mosques, Ferhat and Arnaudiyya, those mosques that were destroyed during the war. And the principle, according to which we allocate the money from our small budget, is the principle, is the consensus. So we use the consensus, the census data, sorry, of the population, because we cannot possibly assess on our own how many are members of the Catholic Church, etc. So we use the census data. We do not have lots of Catholics, for example, 4 or 5%, 20 or 30 Jews in total. But we cannot say, okay, 20, 30 Jews are really small a number, because we give them like 10%, because of how many there were here actually, and what they suffered from 1941 to 1945.
Thank you for the answer. You've partly answered my question too. You said that this law on religious communities supersedes entity boundary lines, and it should also be financed from state institutions. What the Secretariat does is only entity budget. So that is what I wanted to see. So this is all from the RS budget, Republic of Srpska, yes. And this is only for the applications of religious communities in the Republic of Srpska. And since I know from practical matters from religious science, I live in Romania, Arad. My daughter was baptized in Serbian Orthodox Church, goes to Romanian primary school, and they have religion there. But religion there is Romanian Orthodox Church, and that's the end of the story. So I cancelled her subject, and I said, you'll decide one day what you want, not according to LGBT principles, but one day when you make connection with God, you will decide. It's up to me that I provide schooling and education, but you will figure it out what you are with regards to the Lord. Now, what is it like here? I cancelled her classes because it didn't seem right. There is also an Albanian child in the classroom of Islamic confession. The child is there in religion classes because nobody can come to pick up the child, so the child is there in the class. Thank you. I hope I'll see you again. The answer is very simple. Here we do not have national religions, these are confessions. In the Republic of Srpska and in the Federation too, there is Orthodox, Catholic and Islam religion. Now whether the child is Albanian or Syrian or Bosniak, they go to Islamic. If it's Orthodox, it doesn't matter whether it is a Serb, Greek, Bulgarian, they go to Orthodox religions. So religious classes have nothing to do with nationality but confessions. I just wanted to check if I'm right. So, in one school, in primary school in the Republic of Srpska, there is Islam, religious. Yes, absolutely. So, they can attend the classes if they want. Absolutely. There are many classes where they have both, all three of them. For example, in Ljubija school, there is a class with 20 children, equally divided, 5 or 6 Orthodox, 5 or 6 Catholic, 5 or 6 Islam, and they all have their own classes, and after the religious classes, they gather again. So there are differences, but after the classes, they are all together again. And that's not just in the Republic of Srpska, but in the Federation too. If there is just one child of Muslim confession or Catholic, they are entitled to have their own classes. Well, you see, you are far ahead of the EU there. Thank you.